Sometimes we treat the concept of motivation and morale in the same way, but they are not the same. Morale is something that builds with time. It's something that reflects the relationship between employee and the company. And sometimes we confuse it because we want to make employees feel good about something, and we say, well, let's do this activity or this other activity to motivate the employees, to make them feel good, and the treatments of motivation and morale are quite different, but they are related. Then they are related, and they affect one to the other. Motivation is something, probably is something more complex than morale. Morale, as I said, is the result of the relationship between the company and the employees. For example, morale is the attitude that the employees develop towards the company, and morale is something that is more related to climate and to culture. Motivation is more related to the culture of the organization. Morale is more related to the immediate perception that the employee has on the company. Morale, you can flip morale like this really quickly, as motivation is something that is more complicated because it involves a number of variables. They are not that ready yet. For example, learning. For example, competence. For example, opportunity to perform. For example, job design. For example, work composition, feedback. So there are many variables in motivation that they're more hard to get when you want to arrange that type of environment in which employees must perform motivated. As morale is very, for example, if morale can be affected by the most simple things. Let's say that you have a cafeteria in your company where employees go to eat, their meals, and the microwaves are not working properly. The tenants that attend employees are not quite polite. Those little things affect morale, because it's something that is going on in the immediate environment, and it's perceived immediately. So if you change the microwaves, you put good lights in the cafeteria, you change the people that attend employees, that will boost morale. Or they don't, or for example, employee has the employees, their computers are not working properly, and they cannot perform the job well. So you change their computers, or you fix it, that boosts morale. Or for example, it could be also psychological things, like for example, a reward that is given to employees for good performance. And this type of things now is being mixed now with motivation, because if an employee performs well and you give an award, you're touching grounds on little bit of grounds of motivation, but it's most morale that is you're affecting with a reward than the motivation, because motivation has an intrinsic part that is the most important one, and morale is mostly developed, or not developed, but it's mostly an extrinsic operation that you made to affect it individually, whereas motivation, there are both elements, intrinsic and extrinsic. So leadership, for example, leadership is a big variable to affect morale. If you have a bad leader who does not give feedback, who doesn't lead properly, who doesn't involve with employees in the many levels required, organizational, politically, personally even, that affect morals and also could lead to affect motivation, of course. So morale is an immediate feeling. Now, sometimes some things related to morale will be more complex, of course, to solve. But to understand the concept is in that surface, in which immediate surface perception that morale tends to develop. Now, motivation is another topic. Motivation is a more complex, as I said, because it involves psychological variables and also external variables. If you have, for example, an employee who is not performing well and he says or she says she feels demotivated, you have to examine a number of things there. If the job is up to their competence, if the employee has an opportunity to perform, if the employee has developed through time the required knowledge to perform the task, if, for example, employee probably needs more knowledge, more training to perform, if the challenge of the task or the position is up to the knowledge, experience, and abilities to the employee, all those things combined together will result in motivation. If the employee has an immediate feedback from the position and he knows or she knows that the way she's performing or he's performing is good or not, there are many sensors outside and inside that create an immediate feedback that will lead to motivation. If, for example, if the employee is been performing a job in which the employee feels that his potentiality is completely unlocked, and this is a result of that the objectives are clear, the objective, the opportunity, and the competence joined in the same point, so that makes a flow experience from the employee. So those type of things are more psychologically, and they're not that easy to fix. It requires a more detailed analysis of each of the factors that is involved. So, and also this is linked to the culture of the organization. Yeah, there are more cultures that embrace more that employees performs alone, for example, or the employees is more supervised, or the employee chooses, his own means to perform, or the culture will impact directly how an employee will be motivated. Since there are many types of cultures, there are more clan culture, there are more hierarchical cultures, there are more goal-oriented cultures, more customer-oriented cultures. So each of those cultures affects the relationship between competence, between knowledge, between motives, psychological motives from employees, and how those interact with the environment. So intrinsic motivation is the one which is most affected, because extrinsic motivation is something that has a short term. Extrinsic motivation is a short term boost that you create and is very linked to morale, whereas intrinsic motivation is something that is mixed with the internal motives of the employees to develop his character, his knowledge, his personal development. So and this personal development is more focused on things that will make the employee contribute to the culture of the organization, to the company. So if an employee doesn't have the opportunity to contribute, that's not a good thing. If the employee is has too many restrictions to perform, that's not a good thing for motivation. If the employee doesn't know if he's going in the right direction because management doesn't provide the clues or the information that will tell the employee is going in the right track, that will affect motivation. If the employee is not put in a terrain in which their competences and knowledge and experience will be embraced by the organization and will be welcomed, that's not a good thing for motivation. So the employee needs to find this opportunity. Opportunity is key for motivation. If there is no opportunity, forget it. This employee, you can boost the morale all you can. You can have a very fancy office with a top of the line equipment, computers, all the tools and everything. But if the culture in which this space emerge is not a culture that will embrace potentialities to be developed from the employee, forget it. This employee will not perform well, or for the worst case, will leave the company. So when all these conditions are together, motivation, morale, space, culture, climate, you will have an organization that will reach the limits of whatever situation could come. For example, COVID has impacted both things, motivation and morale. I mean, mostly morale, because the conditions in which now employees are working are very hard. I mean, there are some companies that never experience home office, or the situation of COVID had put in a lot of stress, to comply with the job functions and whatever the COVID is affecting the culture of the organization. If for example, for a highly hierarchical type of culture, probably COVID will be something additional to that stress. For a more flat or more less hierarchical organization, probably will have more ability to reinvent and change things. So all those things are affecting employee morale. So management must, of course, we must take care of COVID and all the situation and all the controls required to, but also at the same time you control this, you have to avoid that this implementation of controls, so whatever you're doing in regards on COVID, does not distort or bias the structure of the organization. So this is not just for COVID. This is also to avoid that this the original, let's say original, but the structure of the organization, in which we count policies, charts, organizations, procedures, processes, communication among peers or management, does not be affected. So these two variables, COVID organization, must coexist as much as possible without interfering one to the other, in a sense that this will contaminate the nature of the organization. So it must be set apart, and it's very difficult, and that's the whole job of management. That's the work of management, to continue creating an environment of high performance, even though we are in the middle of this crisis. So this is a good example in which motivation and morale come together, and we need to dissect each of them, not to interfere one another, and not to put in a more difficult or unnecessary stress employees. So that's something that we must bear in mind. So motivation and morale, two different concepts. We need to examine each of those concepts separate, but there is a point in which, of course, they will come together, and as organization develops also, because one thing that affects both of these concepts is the environment of the business, not just per se the climate and culture of the company, but the environment in which business develops, the type of business you are responding to, and how this ultimately, because all these factors that we are talking about ultimately will hit the customer in direct or direct ways. How the organization performs overall will have a link in the future to how the customer perceives your business, and that affects the bottom line, of course. So those are things that you don't want to avoid to treat. Those are very important things that organization must see really carefully, and how this eventually will result in a good or bad relation with the customer. So that's what I had to talk about, motivation and morale.